everybody. Welcome to another episode of Writers to Writers podcast. I'm Suzanne Lieurance.
And I'm Simon Rose.
And before, in the last few episodes, we talked about a little bit about writing nonfiction. And we talked about what we both usually do to get started when we're going to write some nonfiction. And you can just listen to the last week's podcast if you want that information, because today we're going to talk a little more extensively about the research process. That it isn't always needed for nonfiction, depending on the kind of nonfiction you're writing, but many times you've got to do some research. So we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, you and I, we both written non-fiction, and we don't necessarily consider ourselves to be experts. That's for sure on the subjects that we've written about. A lot of research is often needed when writing non-fiction. I certainly had to do lots of it, even with topics I was quite familiar with, especially the historical ones. Historical topics about World War One, World War Two, something like that. I thought, well, I didn't think I knew all about it, but I thought, well, I'm very familiar. But I had to do lots of research for when I was writing the book. That's for sure.
Right, even if it's a short little book, because many times
Yeah.
the nonfiction books for kids are very short, and you might think, well, that's just easy. I don't need to do any research, but you generally do. And I think many times when you do the research, you learn a lot about the subject too. Maybe like you said, you know a lot about polar bears, but if you do a little research, you'll find out some things that you probably didn't know. So I think it's important to do that research because sometimes you'll just learn a lot more that can go into your book or article or whatever you're doing.
So if we're doing research, yeah,
Mhm.
if you're going to be, writing nonfiction, and you're doing some research and everything, writing these books. Now, where do you actually do the research? I mean, obviously, is everything online these days, or do printed materials still have a role to play?
I think it depends a lot on what your topic is you're going to be writing about. Almost everything is on the internet nowadays. So that can be a starting point, I think, where you can just Google whatever your topic is and get some information. But I also think there are a variety of other sources you can find. Um, you know, you got to first think about what do I really need to know about this topic? Um, and one of the things I was going to go into some different things. I know you're going to ask me a little bit about what primary sources and secondary sources are. You want to talk about that for a second before I get into what I was going to say?
Well, what do you mean about that? I mean, for primary sources, what does that mean exactly? I mean, do you mean things that were created at the time something was actually, if it's historical, for example, it's like things that were created at the time that things were happening, like photographs and films and news reports, even sort of letters and diaries, and I suppose if you're doing something like a memoir or a biography, you're going to need access to very personal materials from the person in question, I would imagine.
Oh, unless you're writing your own memoir. That's what I was thinking. You're going to be writing your own memoir. But you're right. Yeah, primary sources are mainly the firsthand accounts. So a person can be a primary source too. So let's say you're writing about a certain event and that person was there and witnessed it firsthand. You can use them as a primary source. If there was a diary kept of a certain event, you can use that diary as a primary source, or journal, or letters between people. Those can be primary sources, maps, things. So a primary source, I'll just give you a quick definition. It's an original first-hand account, artifact, or data record created during the time period or event you are studying. Okay, so there are different types of primary sources too. Historical documents, like we talked about, personal letters, memoirs, even birth certificates, census records, things can be used
Right.
as
Yeah.
historical documents. Then for creative works, original photographs, if you're writing about a certain photographer or artist, paintings, poems, musical scores, novels, those can be used depending on how you're doing the nonfiction. Also, media and spoken records, eyewitness news reports. You can go back and get a newsreel sometime because a lot of places keep those on record. Audio recordings of speeches and transcripts of personal interviews. Then there are archaeological primary sources, just some artifacts, pieces of clothing, and different things. If you were going to write a nonfiction book for kids about a certain time period or whatever, you might try to find some of the artifacts. You could go to a museum and look at them and take pictures of them if they, let you do that. Also, just different things. I always think it's good if you can find a person who is a primary resource because there's nothing like a eyewitness account. Or let's say you are writing about a scientific subject and you can interview a scientist who is maybe doing research on that particular topic. Or if you're writing about a medical topic and you can interview a doctor who knows about that firsthand, then that's always preferable to me than just going and getting some other information in what is called a secondary source. And a secondary source would just be another book or a report or something that isn't really firsthand. It might be a combination of all kinds of materials. So,
So, okay, so with the primary sources, secondary sources, and everything, I suppose that we've got to think as well about if these things are reliable. I
right.
mean, if you're looking at if you're looking at things that are online, for example, I mean, we all well, it's not that we all prefer to do that, I don't suppose, but we've all got so used to it, checking everything online and things like that. But if you found some sources online and everything, it's I'm not saying that they're all untrustworthy particularly, but it is best to double check, triple check, and quadruple check them sometimes. I mean, we were talking before we started the recording here that a lot of the time, if you were doing a book about polar bears, for example, I mean, and did a search, put the word polar bear into the search, and there's going to be a page that pops up at the top of the page, and that's going to be your first place to look. But then you're not going to think after that, oh, right, I now know all about polar bears to write my book. You're going to go back to these search results and check some of the other pages that have come up. And some of them might have exactly the same or similar information about the polar bears that you'd seen before. But it's best to check it over. I mean, some of these online sources have been known to be inaccurate, and even if mistakes in the book once it's done, even if the mistakes in the book are not your fault, the people reading it or reviewing it and things are certainly going to blame you for getting things wrong and not getting your research right.
Yeah, you lose your credibility as a writer. But I think too, one thing for people to keep into account when you're looking for online resources, where are you going online to look for your materials? I always look for things that I know are pretty reputable, like government agencies. Like when I did a book about the Challenger explosion, the shuttle explosion, I went to NASA, their site, and I got a lot of materials. I got a lot of primary source materials, transcripts of the cockpit, what was going on when the Challenger was exploding, photographs, things like that. And when I knew the source they were coming from, I knew they were pretty reputable. The other thing too is, just all kinds of agencies. Let's say you're writing a book on, well, polar bears. Where could you go that you'd know the information would probably be correct? One place I'd probably start is National Geographic, see what kind of things they have there, and they might lead to other sources. Um, I can't think of any real animal kind of agency that might have, I don't know if PETA or one of these other things protect polar bears, if they have anything about that. But just look for things that are pretty reputable. I always look for government agencies, national archives, and professional organizations, not just, John Smith, who has a website and he's interested in polar bears. So he's written all this stuff about them, but yet you don't know who's John Smith. How do I know anything he says is the absolute fact? Um, unless he's credited his sources. And if he's credited his sources on his site, I would probably go back to his original sources
Yes.
instead of just using his site as one of the sources I cite.
Yeah, I was just about to point that out actually as well. That's what I've done sometimes in the past. I've seen, again, I hate to keep mentioning polar bears, but let's say it is the polar bear book that I've been trying to write or something like that. If somebody else has written a book about polar bears,
Mhm.
or they've got it, or there's a website and things like, well, where did they get their information from? And some of it's going to be useful for me, and some of it isn't. But they've obviously have been doing research as well and been recording it. And some of it might be stuff I'd not been able to find, but doing my own searches, like something very useful, like National Geographic, for example. And
Mhm.
there's a link that I can follow, and it's got all the information that they used that I can also refer to.
Right. And I find universities are usually good too, as places that you can find research. For example, when I wrote a book about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, at Cornell University had all kinds of information. They had primary sources, photographs, secondary sources, books from other authors about the subject, all kinds of stuff I could use there. When I was doing a book about prohibition, I think it's the Anti-Saloon League or something was another organization. They had all kinds of information on their site that I could find. Um, and then get it, use it myself, photographs, different things like that, because that's another thing. Many times if you're doing a nonfiction book and you're doing it for a publisher on assignment, they will want you to provide photographs or charts or other information. And so I always look for places where I can get that information royalty free, and I'm also not having to pay for it, because that way I'm not using up all my advance money that I got from the publisher paying for photographs. So,
And you also mentioned briefly about credibility with you as a writer and things. Now that can also happen when you're writing fiction as well and research. Now this all depends, of course. Sometimes if you're writing just fiction that's a story that's set in the modern day and everything, it doesn't apply. But I mean, I've done lots of historical fiction before, or historical fantasy and things, and I've had to do uh, lots of research for that kind of thing. Now, we're not going to delve into that on this podcast. That's something we're going to do in a later edition, but certainly that's something again that if a reviewer, if you've set a story set in a particular era, and then somebody's reviewing your book and says, well, obviously this guy hasn't done his homework here, because this type of thing wasn't invented yet. This wouldn't have existed in this time period in the Middle Ages or something like that, and so your credibility as a writer is done. But that's for a future edition of the podcast. We're going to be talking a little bit more about writing nonfiction again, and research and that kind of thing next time around.
okay. One other thing I'd like to mention, because I know people say, well, now we've told them about primary sources and we've given a few places they could find them. They might ask, well, where do I find the people? You've mentioned primary sources, people as being primary sources. And I think one place you can go, it's online now. It used to be online and they took it down. Now they've redone it, I think. It's called helpareporter.com. Used to be called HARO, HARO, Help a Reporter Out. Then they took it down, then they've put it back up. But usually you can go to helpareporter.com and they will help connect you with primary sources. So if you're doing a report or a book or something on, let's say, certain culture, like Argentinian culture, they will connect you with someone or give you someone. You just type in your question and they help connect it. So there are different things online that connect you with people too. So you just have to get good at uh, finding out where you get your sources. The other thing I'd mention too, it's good that people are listening to us, but they need to also realize connect with other authors. You just learn so much about the writing process and researching, and you make other connections. Like, stuff I don't know, I know stuff you don't know. You know other people who know stuff neither of us knows. And then, we just keep getting more information because there are all kinds of groups online, things for nonfiction writers that can help you find sources, all kinds of stuff. So we'll have a lot to talk about in future episodes. So I hope people will tune in and help us out. And if you have any information yourself about the research process that you would like to share, just leave a comment here and we'd be glad to pass that on to our listeners.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So before we go, I suppose today, once again, I should point out that you can learn more about me and my books and everything on my website at simon-rose.com. And what about you?
And I'm at rightbythesea.com, just like you see above my head, rightbythesea.com. And also get my morning nudge. It's just a little email
Oh,
I
yes,
send out 5 days a week with some writing tips and some other resources. And it's at morningnudge.com. So they can go there.
excellent. Well, so
Yeah.
until then, we shall see you next time. And
Okay.
until then, so happy writing.
Yeah. Happy researching too. Bye.
Yes. Bye.